Tonight on The Primary Source, my guest is a co-founder and senior product manager at SmallTalk, Jocelyn Snyder. SmallTalk is a Palo Alto-based digital experience agency, helping clients bring products or marketing ideas to life across web, commerce, mobile, and messaging channels. Starting with some small talk, how are you, Jocelyn?
Hi, good. How are you?
Doing all right. So
Nice.
tell me, what is SmallTalks in your own words? Could you just describe it in a little bit more detail to me?
Sure. SmallTalk is a company that was started by a group of people that had a strong digital marketing background. So it was myself, my co-founder Josh, and then later on also a few others that started this. And we really focus on helping brands cultivate an experience across all potential touch points or places where businesses can actually interact with customers. So when you think about the digital world today, there are a bunch of channels that businesses can actually use to communicate with their customers. So it's not just having a website, right? You can have an app, you can have a chat bot, you can have, emails. There's a bunch of ways that you can communicate with your customers. So SmallTalk really just makes sure that you're effectively managing a strategy that includes all of those touch points that would be relevant to your business. And our clients range from startups to tech industry giants. So there's always something new and exciting for us to work on.
And now, Jocelyn, how did you get involved with SmallTalk? You were a co-founder, right? How did the
Yeah.
idea come about with you and your friends?
Yeah, so I actually had been previously working at a different startup called IoTerra. It was actually a hardware startup that had software as well, and that's where I actually really found that I wanted to be a product manager. And so that company was acquired, and I was looking for the next big thing to do, and I had some really great mentors at that previous startup, and they knew people in the Valley and were connecting me. And I was trying to figure out at that time if I wanted to work for a big company like an Apple, a Facebook, or a Google, or jump back into the startup world. And there were these two guys, Tim and Alex, who had previously started up agencies, digital marketing agencies, and they were looking to start up a new one with the focus that I just mentioned of working really across all the digital marketing channels that exist today. And so I talked to them, and they were talking about how they wanted to start this, and I was interested as well. And so I met up with a developer named Josh, and so the four of us, kind of just started it from there. Just all had a passion for digital marketing in one aspect or another, whether technically or from a product management side. So it was just a good fit for all of us, and so we got started there.
What about being a senior product manager? What really attracted you towards that position?
Yeah, so that's a bit interesting, I guess, if we dive into my past a bit more. So I actually graduated from Notre Dame with a degree in marketing, and thought for sure that I would just really pursue marketing as my career path. So I went and spent some time out at Target in Minneapolis, their headquarters, working as an analyst and really working in more of a consumer retail mode. And I loved it. And then I had an opportunity to go out to Silicon Valley and work at a startup. And I came in there doing product marketing. So once again, in marketing and focusing on the customer and the customer experience. But in college, I did spend some of my time on a pre-med track and taking, a lot of more technical courses that would go along with that. And so I felt like I was missing something. And in working at that original startup, there were only 4 or 5 of us, and I was the only non-technical person on the team. So I got a lot of exposure to the engineering team. And that's when I started to realize, wow, I feel like something is missing. And I, through my mentors, actually discovered product management as a role. And product management really is perfect for people who love marketing and customer experience, but then also love the technical aspect of creating products. And so that's how I really found that role would be perfect for me, and then kind of fostered that throughout the rest of my career.
What were some of the technical skills you learned while working at the first startup?
Yeah, so I think that in general, just having to, I started to, not directly at that first startup, but I started to take on my own some classes in coding just because in order to be a product manager, you really do need to understand at least the logic behind the products that you're working on. So that's super critical. And so being able to understand it to the point where you can manage a product being created is something that's definitely essential.
What's your day like as a senior product manager?
Sure. So product management is hard to define a day, I would say, but in general, I could start with just saying what product management really is, because I think it's a bit confusing to for most people to understand what it is. It's different at some companies. But my role as a product manager is really just that you sit, I've heard people explain it as you sit in the middle of a triangle. So you sit between business, engineering, and typically design. So when you think about how a product gets created, whether it's a software product or a hardware product, right, you have an engineering team that will actually build it. You have usually a business team that's saying, hey, this is what we want high level, right? We want this product because it'll do this sort of business for our company. And then you have a design team that actually, works on the UI, the UX, the customer experience, the actual, visual design of it. And so product management sits in the middle, and you basically take the idea that the business team has created, and you have to document and write out all the requirements for it so that the design team can actually start to design it and that the technical team can actually start to build it. And then you kind of sit in between those three and just manage the product until it actually gets built. So it's a really great role and job position to have if you feel like your skill set really sits in between those three different groups and you don't want to focus specifically on one, but you kind of want to be in the middle of all of it. As far as day-to-day responsibilities, I'd say that organization is really key. So like I said, you're writing requirements and requirement docs for these products, which can be sometimes 300 pages long, depending on how complex your product is. And so, when you think about writing requirements, it's like, if you think about if a toaster is your product, right? Like you have to talk about, what each knob does when you turn it and how hot it gets and how, it's like you think about every little tiny detail of what makes a product and you need to make sure that it's documented. So that's kind of one of the pieces. You also need to make sure that you're good at, I would say, prioritizing and managing people. Prioritizing because you need to make sure that you ship out the best product, but also within a certain amount of time, right? So you need to make sure that you're good at understanding the customer and what's critical to them, and then trying to cut out things that aren't critical so that you can really focus on that ultimate experience for the customer. So yeah, it's an interesting job because it's hard to define the day to day, but in general, it's just making sure that you're on track to get a product launched. And that you really own what the product becomes and what went into it.
It sounds like it's a very fulfilling job to be able to
It
create.
is. It's so fun.
How would you describe the difference between a more corporate culture like Target and the culture of a startup? Like how did your experiences between those two differ?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's one that I've always find myself, thinking between, what's the best next career move, right? Like before I started at SmallTalk, I was in the middle of making that decision of did I want to go corporate or did I want to stay in a startup? So I think that when you work at a startup, you get a really unique experience because you really just hit the ground running. And you learn quickly. Not only do you learn quickly, but you learn a wide variety of things and you wear many hats. So even though, for example, I came into that original startup in product marketing, I was, doing product management. I was sometimes sitting on the floor and wrapping up shipping boxes and shipping them out to customers, right? Like you're doing a million things at once, because there's just not a lot of people to do it. So it's really great for just getting a lot of experience really, really quickly. So especially if you're right out of college, it's amazing. It's also super fulfilling because you're able to move really quickly, really agile, and get a lot done. That being said, some of the cons to that are that you're probably um, not learning processes as well as you would in a corporate setting or a corporate environment. So when you work at a larger company, they've been through a lot of the difficult things and they've learned from it, right? So they're able to really focus their employees on processes that are tried and true and work. And they also have a lot of great resources for you, like access to data, for example. At a startup, it's really hard to actually, get good data unless you pay a lot of money for it. But at a big company, like typically you already have a lot of data just from even your customers. And so you know what works and what doesn't work. So there's a lot of pros and cons to both, working at a big corporate company, corporation, or working at a startup. And so, startup, you get the speed of it, you get the excitement of it. You get the experience in multiple areas, which is great if you're trying to figure out what you want to do. And then in a corporate world, you get a lot more structure, things move more slowly, but you also get access to tons of awesome resources and you get to learn great processes that will help you grow in your career. So I think personally, everyone should have experience in both. If you're lucky enough to do that, I think that's ideal.
Definitely. It sounds to me like for a younger person, it would be more beneficial to begin at a startup and maybe as they grow, either move on to a corporate company or even develop their startup to a corporate size. Would you agree with that statement?
Absolutely. Yeah. I think there's no right or wrong path. My path was super windy to get to where I am today. But yeah, I think that works perfectly. And I think also in college, you do get some structure, which is good. So you can even leverage, what you learned in college as like the structure of potentially like a corporation.
Speaking about your college experience, did you ever foresee yourself working in this area of marketing?
Definitely not. No. I always thought I was going to be probably, I think for a while, I thought I was going to be a doctor. Then I thought I'd be a sports agent. Then I thought I'd be a buyer at Target. And then now I'm a product manager. So I definitely had no idea what I wanted to do in college. I think that a lot of people don't. If you do, that's great. I don't know how people figure things out quickly. Um, but I think that I always knew that I wanted to have something that was like a very consumer focused business, or a consumer focused area. Um, and so I think that's the one thing that's kind of held true throughout all my different career ideas, whether I was going to be a doctor, working, for a patient to help a patient, or whether I was going to be a buyer, understanding the consumer behind what I was buying, or, product marketing or product management, creating products for a specific consumer. Um, I think that sort of a mindset hasn't changed throughout what I've wanted to do.
So just to talk about your journey, quite literally journey, what brought you from Notre Dame all the way to California in Silicon Valley?
Yeah. So like I said, I went out to Target, and then got really lucky with a family member who actually works in venture capital and in the startup world in Silicon Valley, and kept saying, you should come out here. You should make a jump. It's so much fun. And I remember thinking, no, I love the corporate world. I love structure. I love being organized and having processes. I don't know if I'd make it out there. And then I started to do some interviews out in Silicon Valley, and the one startup I ended up working for, it just seemed like a once in a lifetime opportunity to work for a really small team. And I figured, you're young once, why not take a risk when you're young? And so that's really what brought me out here. And then it was an experience that I obviously fell in love with, and wouldn't have traded for the world. But I think trying to get yourself exposure to startups at a young age is super beneficial. I think that in college, I didn't expose myself to that world as much. I think I was pretty siloed and thinking I should work for a corporation. So I think that's something that I wish I would have done in college, was really try to get involved in startup community at an earlier age.
If you could go back again and change your college experience, maybe your high school experience, aside from having more of an entrepreneurial focus, what do you think you would have focused more on, or would you change it at all?
Yeah, I think, in retrospect, I think everything has worked out for me. So I think I probably wouldn't change it, just because I think everyone has like interesting experiences that get them to where they are and really make them into the person that they are, right? I think that my background at Target was also really essential, for shaping me into the person I am in my career today. So I think I wouldn't change it. Probably like a cliche answer. But I think if I could give people advice, one thing would be, yeah, to make sure that you're always keeping a pulse on the startup world, because it doesn't just impact, you if you want to be in a startup. I think it impacts you a lot if you want to be even in a corporate world. Like, you see companies like Target always doing, cool things, like they do it's like this beta house, I think, that they opened up in San Francisco, where it's like where they introduce all these cool new startup products, whether it's keeping a pulse on, what the top trends are in the startup world, like, chatbots, for example. Like, does your big corporation need one? I think it's super important. So I think I probably wish that I would have been following publications like TechCrunch, for example, and just keeping a pulse on things. I think also being able to marry your major with a technical minor is something that I think would have been really awesome for me to have as a background for myself. So I think, like, for example, having like business and technology as like a double major or a major and a minor, I think that would be super useful for people that are in college right now, or looking to figure out what degrees they want to get. I think always marrying business with the technical degrees is great.
What took you most by surprise at Target? And then what took you most by surprise in Silicon Valley?
So I think what took me most by surprise at Target was just, probably for me at least, it was my first job out of college. So it's just the adjustment from being a college student to being out in the workforce, I think was it's a pretty big jump. And I feel like college prepares you really well. Um, but actually learning how to communicate as an adult in the workforce, I think, is something that people underestimate, like how to properly write emails, and how to have management, etc. I think is something that is a little bit of a bigger learning curve than I think most people when they graduate college realize. But it's a fun one. So that's probably what surprised me most about jumping into Target, just because that was my first career move. And then what surprised me most about the startup world, is that what you were asking?
Yeah. I mean, more so at the first firm you went to and then at SmallTalk.
Yeah. I think the first one that I went to was, like I said, a hardware startup. So it definitely had a big focus on raising capital, which for startups is obviously a big part of what you have to do, is focus on raising money. And so I think for me that was the most shocking and interesting part of it, was just how that works, right? It's something that you don't learn in college, is how to go out and pitch your company to get money, to continue to grow your business. So I think watching that unfold, um, with the team at that first company, I thought was really, really interesting, and a big part of Silicon Valley. And then with Small talk. I think just being able to work with companies on strategies for how they could take their businesses to the next level as far as engaging with their customers, whether through like an e-commerce website or just through these other digital channels. I think that being able to work with different companies on totally different strategies for what makes their business better. I think for me, that's always the most interesting part of that business, is that there's always some new challenge to work on and a new product and a new project. So it's a different business for me because I used to be focused on just like one product, but being able to focus on a bunch of different clients' needs at once has been really exciting and fun and interesting.
What advice would you have for someone who was hoping to create their own business? Let's say they're a young person between the ages of 18 and let's say 21. What would you say they
Sure.
might want to read, maybe learn? What sort of skills would you say they should dabble in?
Yeah, so I think the first thing is just start one. And I know that sounds stupid, but like when I was in college, I did SAT tutoring, which probably seems like really small scale, right? But just being able to learn how to manage a really small, tiny business when you're young, I think is extremely helpful experience for when you're older and actually starting a much bigger, more complex business. So just forcing yourself to just start something, even if it's super, super small, I think is a really big deal. Additionally, I think podcasts are really actually helpful. So I remember I used to listen to How to Start a Startup, which I think was a podcast that Stanford had with, Y Combinator and a bunch of great Silicon Valley speakers. And I love that podcast. And then just, browsing the internet for great resources. I mean, you can even learn now how to, you can learn like how to code on websites like Treehouse, for example. Like there's just a ton of great resources out there where people have, learned, from experience and from actually doing it.
Definitely. I'll link those down in the description, everybody. And just one final question for you tonight, Jocelyn. And it's a kind of deep one.
Oh gosh.
What would you define as success?
Ooh, what would I define as success? So if I had to define success, at least for me personally, I think it would be making sure that I'm surrounded by good people, whether that's just personally or whether that's at work. Um, and then also making sure that I feel like I'm actually making an impact. Um, and that doesn't have to be some larger social impact. It honestly, for me, means that I'm working on a product, for example, that I can see a real, tangible impact of. Like I can actually see that product come to life, and I can interact with it after I've created it. And for me, that's such a fulfilling experience. So I think it's a mixture of those two things for me if I'm thinking about this from like a personal success aspect, and then also from a career success aspect. It's yeah, just always making sure that you're surrounded by great people at work that can push you further, whether that's a mentor, whether that's just great coworkers that are smart and you can bounce ideas off of, and then making sure that you're fulfilled by actually creating something at work that you can be proud of.
That's a lovely definition of personal success, Jocelyn. And I want to say thank you for taking the time to come on to the podcast tonight.
Thank you so much.
Glad to have
This
you
was
here.
fun.
Glad you had a good time. And everybody, thanks for watching tonight. Please, if you could, subscribe, like, share, all down below. There's links. Everything we talked about is going to be in the description. And there will be another podcast out next month. Thanks for watching, everybody, and have a good night.